This week in our Torah reading, we are in the middle of what is called the Holiness Code. At the center of these chapters is the basic idea that in order to become a holy people, we need to behave in extra holy ways, with a list of laws describing how to do that. We read a mini recap of the 10 commandments, honoring your parents, not bowing down to idols, not lying or stealing, and similar ethical imperatives. And in this list, there is one mitzvah that we typically don't focus on, given the more famous commandments on either side. It gets translated by our rabbis to mean, you shall not curse your fellow. It's not quite the same as prohibiting lashon hara, evil speech, which also comes from the Torah portion this week, but it is something else. Many of us know that lashon hara is bad, but cursing people technically constitutes a whole other category of sin. And let's face it, this has not been an easy mitzvah for our people to actually commit to over the course of our history. We are an opinionated people. And following the cliche, we are used to disagreeing with each other. It would be human nature, therefore, to want to curse one another. So historically, Jews combine this cultural predisposition for strong opinions with the halachic prohibition against cursing people, and all of this resulted in a unique Jewish sort of condemnation, a kind of curse that is only sort of a curse. You may be familiar with the Yiddish saying, "Wachsen sollst du wie a Zibbel mitten Kappen dreht." May you grow like an onion with your head in the ground. In other words, what technically appears to be a benign wish winds up being something very different. A blessing with an edge, you might say. A contemporary version might be, may you get rich beyond your wildest dreams, and may you retire to Florida just as climate change is coming into view. You get the idea. May God bless and keep the czar far away from us. We, as a people, just can't resist a loophole. And the desire to curse one another seems always to remain in every generation, even though we know it is forbidden. Jews have struggled to observe this commandment, presumably since the Torah was given at Sinai. In the 12th century, Maimonides reiterated that it is a commandment not to curse your fellow, likely because he saw people in his own time doing so. He based his argument on a verse from this parsha where we read, Lo tikalel cheresh, you shall not curse a person who is deaf. Earlier rabbis like Rashi point out that part of why this presents a problem is that such a person is not able to hear the curse invoked against them. And then he expands upon it, saying that it is wrong to curse any living being, whether or not they can hear it. And it is equally wrong to curse the dead, who definitely cannot. Cursing another, according to our tradition, is like cursing the God who created that person, which would be tantamount to blasphemy. And these days, cursing one another, vilifying them and wishing them ill, especially our fellow Jews with whom we disagree, has become commonplace. For the past weeks, the clergy of CBE have given sermons about the escalation of public discourse with the protest movements on college campuses reaching a fever pitch, and with the reaction to them polarizing our community even further. And though I think we're doing a pretty good job of holding the humanity of many different people at once and the opinions of many different people at once, holding people together right now may be the hardest thing of all. When Jews from across the various spectra of belief, opinion, and observance can't agree even on the basic terms of our communal debate. At the beginning of this parsha, we read the reason for the commandments therein. Daber el kol adat b'nei Israel, speak to the whole community of Israel. Ve'amarta alehem kedoshim tihiyu, as we heard earlier. And say to them, you shall be holy, as in you all, collectively, in the plural. The implication is not merely then supposed to be a list for how to be decent people, but how to be a decent people, because that is the path of holiness in the Torah's view. What follows then are not merely rules about gossip and curses. The laws in this parsha expand even further than that to describe how to build a just and functional society and all the relationships that that takes. In verse 17 we read, Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. You shall not hate your sibling in your heart. Reprove your kinfolk, but incur no guilt on their account. Perhaps we can take this to mean when you see your fellow doing something wrong, tell them, but be sure to continue seeing them as human. This is as much a lesson for the protesters as it is for the counter-protesters. Rebuke is a good thing, but as Rashi explains, rebuking someone cannot mean shaming them or seeking their elimination. Referencing the Midrash and Talmud, he teaches that if we shame our loved ones, it is as though we have murdered them, and therefore it constitutes a grievous sin. Ibn Ezra reminds us that the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed because of the hatred our people had for one another. At times, friends, it feels like the Jewish world is eating itself alive. Our internecine debates about the campus protests, not to mention our differences in responding to this war between Israel and Hamas, are tearing us apart. And it seems like we too are destined for a temple to be destroyed. Even if we try hard here at CBE to make a space for loving disagreement, and I hope that everyone here feels like there is a place for them, it does feel like American Jewry is on the precipice of some kind of collapse. And if we are failing to be a holy collective of the sort that this parsha commands, it may be because of the way we are treating one another. In the next verse of Leviticus, we read the most famous line of this portion, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Seems pretty clear, I suppose, except that it isn't at all. For one thing, loving yourself isn't always so easy. And really, how are we supposed to love everybody all the time? What does it actually mean? Rashbam, the grandson of Rashi, says that it only applies if your neighbor is righteous. But if you're wicked, you don't have to love him, which does sound like a little bit of a joke or one of those Yiddish curses. Ramban argues that it means you should wish the same benefits on another that you yourself enjoy, implying that we should build a world of equal benefits and opportunities. And many others, notably Rabbi Hillel, teach this to mean, what is hateful to you, do not do to another. These interpretations are somewhat easier for us to get behind, but given this moment, I choose to read the commandment to love your fellow as yourself through the lens of a different commentary from the 18th century Rabbi Naphtali Wiesel. He argued that if your neighbor is kamocha, if they are like you, then they are created in the image of God just as you are. Wiesel understood that when the Torah says to love one another as yourself, it's not speaking the language of extent. It's not about how much to love that person. Rather, it's how to love the person, which is simply seeing them as a person who wants to be loved as much as you do. This reading implies that the Torah isn't commanding us to like people with whom we disagree, but rather to remember that they are worthy of love, and then to remember that we are worthy of love by them and by the rest of humanity. Friends, I don't need to tell you that we are in the throes of something unprecedented in the life of our people. 7 months out since October 7th, we are still reeling, as we are also increasingly distressed every single day by the devastation in Gaza. And as we seek an end to this war, a ceasefire and the return of hostages, we need to find some way of being good to each other, to avoid the human impulse to curse one another or act out, to build the Jewish community that we want to see, which will include many chances to offer rebuke, and to offer that rebuke as humanly as possible. These are the lessons by which our people has endured, and they must remain the benchmarks against which we judge ourselves as we grapple with this time and seek holiness together. Shabbat Shalom.